how is it possible for me to have achieved what I've achieved as a natural bodybuilder training just 3 days a week? And most people will tend to say things somewhere along the lines that I'm training 3 days a week because I'm trying to maintain what I've already built, and that the foundation of muscle and strength that I was able to achieve over the years, something I did from training more days a week. And that's absolutely false. I've been training 3 days a week now for the past 31 years. And given the fact that I've trained hundreds of people, from those just trying to put some muscle mass on, those who are trying to get stronger, those trying to lose weight, to professional natural bodybuilders, both male and female, and 3 days a week, no more, not 4, not 5. I think it's important that we take a look at training frequency a little bit differently. In this video, we'll talk a little bit about how I train 3 days a week and how it might probably be something that you might want to consider as well. Stay tuned and we'll talk a little more about this. So in this video, I'm talking about how it is that I train 3 days a week and why I think that more people should probably be considering training less. So before I go any further, I'd like to take the time to acknowledge all the kind comments I've got and the tremendous support we've been getting so far for this channel, especially those who say that this should be an important resource for anybody interested in natural training. Thanks so much for sharing. Thanks so much for your support. And do be sure to like, subscribe, and also ring that bell so you're first in line when the new content comes out. So on to our topic at hand, training 3 days a week. So before we go any further, it's important to understand that in science, real science, not bro science, not conjecture, in order for you to have a scientific approach to any methodology of doing anything, there has to be what's called a minimum dose. A minimum dose is what someone is creating an intervention of any form or any type to try to figure out what's the least amount is required to achieve a certain effect. Now, when it comes to bodybuilding, there really is two schools of thought. There's the high intensity camp that I'm part of, and then there's the high volume camp. Now, way back in the day, these decisions were pretty much decided not by people going into the gym and training and getting information based on their training, but by the top bodybuilders of the day. Arnold Schwarzenegger, bless his soul, was extremely important for popularizing bodybuilding. But he also popularized the idea that you need to train for long periods of time and train almost every single day to get maximum gains. Sounds great. And everyone knows how popular Arnold is and how fantastic his physique was. Except we don't use what Arnold Schwarzenegger was using when he was Mr. Olympia, when he was competing as a bodybuilder. And there has never been a natural athlete that's been out there talking about what's optimal. In fact, when most natural athletes talk about their training, what I see is them pretty much parroting what the drug using bodybuilders do. So among drug users, training more makes sense. If you are using anabolic steroids, you are going to recover much faster than the average human being ever could. In fact, when we think about athletes using steroids, most of us have the idea of them using steroids to get bigger and stronger. And we kind of expect athletes who use steroids to kind of, look all bulky. That's not what steroids primarily do. The primary focus of using steroids is for recovery. Now, if you're training 6 days a week and using anabolic steroids, your body can recover from every single workout you can much faster than someone who is not using anabolic steroids. In fact, among the steroid handbooks, they talk about the importance of volume training. It's important to maximize, the fact that you're enhanced and maximize the fact that you have an ability to use more protein and build more muscle in shorter periods of time compared to an average human being. But the problem is that since almost all the athletes that we follow, all the personalities out there use steroids, and I'm not judging anyone for what they do. What I am judging is the fact that people on steroids are the ones who tend to be setting the policies as to how everybody else should be training. And there's nobody out there taking a scientific approach to try to figure out what's the minimum dose. What's the minimum dose for a natural athlete? Now, as I was saying earlier, if we take into consideration the fact that so many people train 4 days a week, even more people train 5 days a week, and the dedicated, and I put dedicated in quotes, tend to train 6 days a week. If you're training that often and you're seeing some results, but that's the only way you train and you never do anything else, it is physiologically impossible for you to know whether training less will be beneficial for you. I started off training like everybody else 5 days a week. In fact, I started training 6 days a week. And the guys in the gym told me it was too much. I was very young. They're like, it's too much. 5 days is all you can do, because it was very important that your muscles recover from the workouts, because they said bodybuilding is about breaking down your muscles while you're training. While you're resting, those muscles are built back to be bigger and stronger than they were because the fact they went through all that stress. And that recovery process happens not while you're training, while you're resting. So it's important to have rest. Now, that made a lot of sense to me. And as I went on and got to a point where I wasn't seeing results I wanted to see and started seeing a real plateau, I realized that, number one, I was following the routines and training frequencies of those who were using steroids, and I wasn't using steroids. And number two, I remembered what they kept on telling me, how important recovery was. Now, my initial idea was to drop down my training frequency to 4 days a week. And I thought that if I increased my intensity and trained as hard as humanly possible and trained 4 days a week, I would have even better results than 5 days a week and break through that plateau I was going through. So I decided that's what I was going to do. And here's what happened. I couldn't do it. I couldn't train 4 days a week. When I was training at the intensity that I was training at, my workouts became extremely short. They went down actually in the beginning to about 10 minutes per workout. I couldn't do any more. No matter how hard I tried, it was impossible. And as far as the idea of coming into the gym 4 days a week, that wasn't going to happen either. Now, my initial training split was, and I'll put it up here so you can see it. Day 1 was legs. Day 2 was back and shoulders. Day 3 was chest, arms, and sometimes abdominals. Now, day 1 was legs. Legs is the hardest muscle group to work. And as such, I always wanted to get it straight out of the way. So no matter what happened during that week, I would never miss a leg day, since leg training creates the most overall effect in terms of both muscle growth and fat loss. So leg day was always first. Day 2 was back and shoulders. And then day 3 was chest, arms, and in my early days, abdominals. Although I did stop training abdominals in 1998, and interestingly enough, did almost all my competitions here in the United States after stopping training abs, and have done pretty well without doing abs at all. But that's a topic for another video, so stay tuned for that. The possibility of training the same muscle group twice in 1 week with the intensity that I added to my workouts was impossible. And I could only train 2 days a week. And that's what I did, because I was also in the idea of trying to experiment to figure out what the minimum dose was. I figured I would try this. I'd see how things would go for 6 months. And if I had good results, I'd consider keeping it. If I didn't, I would change it. And what happened was I broke through that plateau. I was hovering somewhere around 165 pounds or so, and I wasn't really moving. And I was able to get ready for my first bodybuilding competition at 175 pounds. And there was a big difference in that 10 pounds in terms of my strength levels, my muscle density. I was starting to kind of get that sense that I could really be a bodybuilder. My body changed just to that point where I could really see something going on here. And I made sure, in the spirit of trying to keep constants, that my diet was exactly the same. So my diet's the same. My training got harder. My time in the gym got less, and I got better results. And I kept on doing that for 6 months. And at the end of that 6-month period, it didn't make sense to put that extra fourth day back in there because I was doing really well. So the idea was, don't rock the boat if things are working really well. And to make a long story short, not too long afterwards, I started up as a personal trainer, and I started training my first client the same way I trained, because I was told that what the most important thing as a personal trainer is to understand that your training is a craft. And the only way you can master a craft is if you ensure that those who you train the same way you do. Mastery comes not just from what you do, but also from seeing what you're doing in others. And you have to have a sound commitment to the efficiency and effectiveness of what you're doing, and also be open to the idea of changing it if it's not working. And so my idea was, with my initial clients, more or less an experiment. You see, I was training 10, 15 minutes, 3 times a week and experiencing massive gains. I was doing really, really well. And in the spirit of science, my idea wasn't trying to prove that 3 days a week with a low time in the gym was something that works. I wasn't trying to do that. When I started personal training and started getting clients, my whole idea was trying to disprove it, because that's what science is. And that's the problem we have today in terms of any fitness information. It's all based on trying to prove that something works. I was never trying to do that. In fact, to this day, I am not about doing that. What I set out to do over the next 10 years was to try to disprove it. Now, the fact that I train clients for 10 minutes means that I have, over the years, trained a lot of people, a lot of different people from different places, in different places, with different needs. And what I was trying to do is to try to find who this form of training did not work for, because I didn't know if it was some genetic or individual error of small numbers that allowed me to make the gains that I made. My first client, and we'll talk a little more about that in future videos, did really, really well. She lost a lot of weight training 3 days a week for 10 minutes. Fantastic. But I couldn't use that as a gauge to say I had something that worked, because two of us had really good gains. She had lost weight on the program. I had built muscle on the program. So I needed more, because if you only have a small number, you can't extrapolate. You need a large number. If not, you fall into what's called the error of small numbers. And you never want to do that if you're looking at things from a scientific perspective. And so for the next 10 years, I documented every single client I trained. I also documented meticulously my own progress. I charted my own progress into being someone who was a budding, kind of starting off natural bodybuilder to a successful top tier natural bodybuilder. And I kept on training the same way. My diet did change as time went on because I had access to much more food. But what was constant was the fact that my training times were always the same. I was constant was the fact that all my client training times were all the same. That being said, given the fact that 31 years later, I'm still able to see increases in my strength, I'm still able to see increases in my physique, having trained just 3 times a week, I think it's important. My experience plus the hundreds, I'm not saying dozens or 100. We're talking about hundreds, and they all had the same results. There was never one person who followed the dietary guidelines I gave them, who trained consistently 3 times a week, who didn't have a significant increase in muscle mass and a significant decrease in body fat. And here's the important part. I've had several clients, especially early on in my career, who didn't believe in Kevin's 3 times a week training programs. I've had clients who are coming in for bodybuilding competitions who would train with me 3 times a week and then go on and train more times. They'd put in 2 extra days. Somebody would put in 3 extra days. The frequency of doing more always seemed to correlate with a certain diminishing in their overall physiques and their strength levels compared to those who only train 3 days a week. I was thankful and always have been thankful to have people doing different things in a constant setting so I could really see what was working and what wasn't. Those trying to lose weight, training 3 days a week with me, and those on their own training 3 extra days or 2 extra days, 5 days a week, didn't ever lose as much weight as the one training 3 days a week. But here's the problem. The question then pops up. Well, why is nobody training less? Because we're afraid. We're afraid to experiment. We're afraid to try. We're afraid to look at things that are new. Now, as far as training less, is it possible to get the same results training less? I have data on that as well. I've had clients who were only able to train twice a week because of their very busy schedules. And what I noticed was there was some reduction in overall progress in terms of muscle building, strength building, and especially with weight loss for those training twice a week compared to those training 3 days a week. That's pretty much set in stone. I've also had clients who were only able to train with me once a week. And compared to those training 3 days a week, there was a big difference. Someone training once a week also experienced much less in terms of results, both with muscle building, strength increases, and weight loss, depending on what you're looking for. And my recommendation strongly is and always will be 3 days a week seems to be the sweet spot. I am one of the few people who have actually had the privilege of training this many individuals, men, women, aged from 12 years old to as old as 93 years old. And I have a huge vat of information in front of me that I'm looking at. And to be quite honest and very, very forthright, if at any point in time I had seen someone training 4 days a week and making more progress in 3 days a week, I would have done it. And here's why I would have done it with my clients. I would myself. I'm a personal trainer. I make money when a client comes into the gym. Back in the days when I was in-person training, now I'm 100% online training. I make money every time I train a client. If I train a client 4 days a week or 5 days a week, I make more money than I do training them 3 days a week. In fact, from a business perspective, I have had significant fallout with business partners over the years, going into deals where we would run a gym together or they would partner with me with my service. And it always came down to that question of, Kevin, why don't you train your clients 4 days a week? We'll make more money. No one will know 4 days a week versus 3 days a week. You know who will know? I will know and my clients will know. It is impossible to express to you how important the progress of my clients is to me and to every single person who comes to me for advice. I always grew up in the environment where bodybuilding and training wasn't so much something about making money. It was about passing on a tradition, and it was about caring for the person in front of you. And when you care for the person in front of you, you want to always make sure that they get the best of your services and do unto others as you'd have done unto you. It's always been a rule I've lived with. And that's just what this is. I would have made a lot more money in my career if I trained my clients 4 days a week, but my clients would not have had the success that they would have had over the years had they trained 4 days a week, nor would I have. It's not a gimmick. It really is something to consider. And I think it's important that you don't just listen to me. You try it out for yourself. Because again, science isn't about, well, Kevin said to do this, so that's what I'm going to do. Science is about give something a try. Keep your diet exactly the same. Change training days. The fact that someone's training more than 2 days a week doesn't mean 3 days a week training is invalidated. In fact, it validates it. Now, everyone does not train at the intensity that I train and the intensity I train my clients. That's a fact. And if you don't have someone around pushing you during your workouts, really pushing you, it's not going to be the same. If your intensity is a lot lower, you can train longer. You can train for an hour. You can train 5 days a week, 6 days a week. And yes, will you see results if you do that? Absolutely. And that's the important point as well. The fact that I train 3 days a week doesn't invalidate the fact someone can get results training 5 days a week or 6 days a week. It's not about validating or invalidating. It's about trying to take the experience I've had and share it with you. Now, from there, you make your decisions as to if it's something that you want to consider or not. And I think that in the fitness industry, they need to be more talking to you, the public, like intelligent human beings. You have the ability to rationalize and think for yourself. And I want you to do that. Consider the fact of the success that I've had over the years, training 3 days a week. Consider the fact that my clients have had success training 3 days a week. Consider also the variations that seem to occur with people who train longer with my particular methodology. And if you think it's something that works for you, don't be afraid to use it, even though people around you may be training differently. That's the other thing. One of the hardest parts for me was having to always deal with the pressure of you're not training enough. You're not training enough. I remember walking into Fifth Avenue gym, training 3 days a week, walking in, walking out, people who weren't even bodybuilders telling me that I would never amount to anything if I kept on training just 3 days a week. And my answer to them was always, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to get into contest shape 3 days a week, no extra, no cardio. I'm going to do exactly what I've been doing for all these years and show you that it can actually work. And most people, when they saw it, they had no problem with it. They were like, yeah, it may not be something I want to do, but it's something that seems to actually work. And we need to have a little more of that, a little more respect in the fitness community that there's many ways to get up that mountain. And just because someone gets up that mountain in a way that's different from the way you do, doesn't mean you got to pull them down. So keep lifting everybody up. And most importantly, Excelsior. Thanks for tuning in.